Is that? Yeah. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Noswystar, Croesio, good evening and welcome. My name is Mark Morris. I'm a member of the Merthyr Trades Council. And I've been honoured to be invited to be tonight's chairman. I do not live in the Merthyr and Rumney constituency, so whoever is elected from the 8 nominees, it will not be my MP. So we're trying to be as impartial as possible here. And Merthyr Trades Union Council would like to thank everybody for coming tonight, the candidates, the representatives and yourselves, the audience. It's nice to see a good turnout here tonight. A few ground rules before we start. Tonight's event will be filmed, as you can see there. If anybody wants their identity to be withheld because they should be somewhere more interesting tonight, then can they see the photographer afterwards and he can, I don't know, fuzzy up your face or something to hide it. That the film will be being put up on YouTube or social media afterwards. Since Merthyr's Trades Council are tonight's hosts, no member of the Trades Council will be asking any questions. At the end of the evening, there will be a voluntary collection at the exit, which will help pay for the hire of the chapel here tonight. If anybody would like to become a Trades Council delegate, then please contact either myself or any person with a bucket at the exits. The candidates are all here before you. I won't introduce them all at the moment. They can introduce themselves when they speak. But I have got one sort of alteration to the running order of nominees. The Speaker for Plaid Cymru couldn't make it tonight. She had a prior engagement, I believe. And Steffan is here, who's the parliamentary candidate for this line. He's here to speak on her behalf. The seating allocation for candidates on the top table was randomly selected by the nominees picking up a token, and you can see the order in which they'll come up and speak from my right to my left later on. The first session will start with each candidate speaking for up to 5 minutes on why they would be the best MP for Merthyr Tydfil and Rumney. You'll see the ballot box in front of me here. This was shown to each candidate at the start of tonight, confirming it was empty. Anyone in the audience is able to ask a question. You have to write your name and the subject on a card and place it inside the ballot box before the question session starts. And lots of you have already done that, and that's great. We'll have a few minutes pause after all the nominees have spoken to allow the audience to put their questions in the ballot box. Please wait until all the speakers have finished talking before walking around, if at all possible. I know sometimes we have to leave. The second session will start with me drawing a question from the ballot box, and I will then ask that person in the audience to ask their question. If the question is on the same subject that we've had, or by the same person that we've had already, then I'll use my discretion to put that card to the side and draw out another question. We have an assistant to my side, Tina, just like any glamorous show host I have over there, and she will be keeping timekeeping, and we have a bell that's going to ring on the 2 minutes. I'll be keeping an eye, thank you, I'll be keeping an eye on Tina, and if she can just give me the nod when we're coming up to 2 minutes, and if I can tell the candidates that their time is coming up, whatever I will do. Well, really, can I ask just that people have a respectful and orderly debate, no heckling and no shouting out. You know, it's a difficult enough job up here as it is. I'm not David Dimbleby, and I haven't got a production team behind me to sort of help out. So please make it easy for me, and hopefully we'll have a very informative and entertaining evening. Diolch yn fawr. Looking at my list here, number 1 we have is Gerald Jones of the Labour Party to speak. Thank you, Gerald.
Thanks very much. Can I first of all thank the Merthyr Trades Council for organising tonight's event. I think Hustings is an important part of the democratic process. I hope I'll still think that at the end of the evening. I certainly do now. Just like to give a brief introduction really about myself. My name is Gerald Jones. I first got involved in politics when I was 14. It was 1984, it was the miners' strike. I didn't really know it was politics then, but I knew that my community was under attack from Thatcher and the Tory government of the day. And I knew that I wanted to make a stand and do something and stand up for my community. Here we are 30 years later in 2015, and our communities have been under attack again from a Tory government. I've been a county councillor since 1995, almost 20 years, on Caerphilly County Borough Council, and I've also been a community development worker since 2001, working for an organisation called GABA, which is very similar to VAMT in the Rumney part of this constituency. I was born and raised and still live in this constituency, and I've worked in many of the communities across this constituency over many years. I worked with lots of community groups that I believe passionately in the power of community. I think it's fair to say that this election is a clear choice. Over the past 5 years, we've seen an attack on working families. We have a situation where, for the first time in living memory, people are worse off at the end of a government, the end of a parliament, than they were at the start of a parliament. Almost £1,600 a year for the average family. We've seen a cut of around 10% to the Welsh Government budget, equates to something like £1.5 billion. We've seen the Tories and the Lib Dems tax cuts to millionaires. It equates, if you're a millionaire, to £42,000 a year tax cut. And while they're given the £3 billion tax cut to millionaires, what we found for ordinary families, we've had VAT raised, which has costed the average family £450 a year. We've had an assault on tax credits for working families. We've had rising energy costs. We've had the bedroom tax. We've had zero-hour contracts. And we've had people across this constituency forced to rely on food banks to put food on the table. Incidentally, the use of food banks has increased by 163% between 2012 and 2013. And the Tories have promised more cuts. We're told that this will take us back to the spending levels of the 1930s. Well, I don't know about you, but that's not somewhere I want to be, and I'm sure it's not somewhere that the people in this constituency want to be. Labour will offer a fairer future for our country. We recognise that Britain succeeds when working families succeed. We want to tackle the cost of living crisis. We want to put a freeze on energy bills until 2017, and by that time we will then work with energy companies and force them to bring energy bills down. We will ban exploitative zero-hour contracts, which make it unsuitable for lots of people who are trying to have mortgages and live their lives with the uncertainty of not knowing how many hours they're working from 1 week to the next. We will increase the minimum wage by £8 an hour, at least, and encourage firms to use the living wage and have tax incentives to allow firms to do that. We will scrap the unfair bedroom tax, which has affected 1,500 families in this constituency. We will have a mansion tax on properties over £2 million to fund more doctors and nurses in our NHS. We'll have a levy on bankers' bonuses to support jobs for young people who have been unemployed for a year or more. Ladies and gentlemen, we have clear choices. We have Tories with their unfair cuts, or we can build hope with a Labour government. There are two realistic outcomes on the 7th of May, a Labour government or 5 more years of David Cameron. The Tories have never been a friend to our constituency or our country. They've shown this more in the last few years than ever before. I hope that you will support Labour and kick the Tories out. Thank you very much indeed.
Gerald, and next Bill Rees.
Jumped the gun there. Noswaith dda, good evening. Can I just begin by adding my thanks to Gerald's words, to the thanks to the Trade Council for organising this hustings. It's great to have an event like this where we can really get the policies out there and thrash out where we stand. My name is Bill Rees, and I am the Welsh Conservative parliamentary candidate for Merthyr Tydfil and Rumney. And I am fighting this campaign with 3 positive priorities. I want to get more and better jobs into Merthyr Tydfil and Rumney. I want to get behind local businesses. I want to be a champion for local industry and fight hard to bring in new companies and businesses into this constituency. I want to make sure that work pays. The Conservatives want to get behind those who find work, who work hard, and we've increased the threshold at which you start paying tax, and we want to raise this threshold further to make sure that workers get to keep more of their own money. Sadly, Merthyr has a reputation of high levels of unemployment and levels of poverty which it's had for a number of years, and we know there are a number of factors which contribute to this. But when the rest of the country is growing, is thriving, is prospering, why isn't more of that growth, more of those jobs and more of that investment coming to Merthyr Tydfil and Rhayna? Since I was selected at the beginning of the year, I have spent the last few months talking to businesses and employers up and down Merthyr and Rhayna who tell me that they want to grow and they want to expand, but they find Merthyr a hard place to do business. They tell me that they find Labour-led local authority, they find them very hard to deal with. They tell me that the prevailing attitude in the area is that things cannot and won't change. They tell me that all the politicians here are in it for themselves and that no one will stand up for them. Well, I am standing as the candidate for change here in Merthyr Tydfil and Rhayna. If you vote Labour, you can expect no change in here in Merthyr Tydfil, and it will be the same place in 5 years as it is today. Or you can vote for the economic growth, the jobs and the investment that we're seeing in the rest of the economy that the Conservative-led government is bringing across the UK. You can vote for that prosperity to come here to Merthyr. As you will know, the last Labour government left office with a massive budget deficit, a faltering economy, and 500,000 higher unemployed than when they entered office in 1997. The Conservative-led government is approaching this election having turned Britain around, with now 1.9 million more people in work, half the budget deficit, and the fastest growing economy in the G7. That has happened because the Conservatives have made tough decisions to reduce the deficit, with opposition from Labour all the way through. We, the Conservatives, have got behind business and enterprise workers and families. But we're not just standing on our record. We have a strong and positive plan for the next 5 years. We want to continue the jobs growth by backing enterprise, business and hard work. We want to get behind working people by lifting more low-paid earners out of tax, and by raising the threshold at which you start paying tax to 12,500. We want to increase the minimum wage to £8 by 2020, and we've pledged to continue the growth in apprenticeships, and we've pledged to create 3 million more apprenticeships by 2020. And I want to see that prosperity not just in the UK, I want to see it come here to Merthyr and Rhayna as well. Can you imagine the news the next day after the election if a Conservative Member of Parliament was elected in Merthyr? It would be saying to the rest of the world that the politician in Merthyr is no longer anti-business, they're pro-enterprise, they're pro-employers. It would say, come here and invest, come here and employ, come here and be a part of a positive and bright future in Merthyr. I ask you to think carefully not just about your future, but the future of your children and the future of Merthyr. Do not put the nation's recovery at risk by letting Labour and the SNP win the election. And don't let the status quo tick over here in Merthyr by electing Labour again. On May the 7th, vote for the Welsh Conservatives. Vote for Bill Rees. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And over to Steffan now.
Diolch Marianne, thank you very much. I too would like to thank Merthyr Trades Union Council for hosting this event this evening. As was mentioned at the beginning, I'm a last-minute substitution. I'll leave you to decide whether I'm the super sub that's come off the bench. Sadly, our excellent candidate, Rhayna, couldn't make it this evening, so I'm stepping in. I'm Steffan, who was the parliamentary candidate for Plaid Cymru in the neighbouring Blaenau Gwent constituency. These hustings are very important, and I know that in an age of Twitter and Facebook, a lot of people like to think the rise in social media now is going to dominate how we do politics. I think it's actually through events and functions like this that we get real engagement with people. So I hope to see many more of these events throughout this election campaign and in the future. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Manchester for the UK Leaders TV debates, and it was a huge event, a significant event. But you can't beat an evening on a sunny evening like this in Merthyr Tydfil with good value people, I don't think. This election is as important as any other election I think we can remember. This election, I think, is the first election that's not just properly a multi-party election where a full range of choices are now in front of you. You get a sense of all the differences of opinion that exist between the political parties. but it's a multinational election as well. And what I mean by that is, for so long when it comes to Westminster elections, Wales is usually not even mentioned. We don't get a look in. It's usually the Westminster parties arguing it out among themselves. And of course things have changed recently with the rise of the SNP in Scotland, and people have started to pay attention to things up there. Well, this is our opportunity now in this election to make Wales matter, to make Wales count, and to get people in those corridors of power thinking about how their decisions affect people in our communities back here in Wales. Of course, there's one big other factor that is dominating this election this year, very importantly because it's affected all of us. And it's that question of austerity, about the public finances, about balancing the books. I'm glad to see somebody else agrees with me that austerity is really bad for Wales and for Welsh communities. But remember what they told us at the last election. They told us that cutting public services, that slashing welfare, that balancing the books on the back of the poor was essential in order to eliminate the deficit, to get rid of the UK's debt, and to keep hold of the UK's AAA credit rating. They didn't get rid of the deficit. The British state's debt is over £1.5 trillion, and the UK, with one credit agency, lost its AAA rating. So all that pain we've gone through, the cutting back of services, the slashing of welfare, the punishment of those who had the least, what's that been for? What have we gained from that pain? And so I'd ask you that whatever party is going to stand up and tell you that it's essential to do certain economic things by certain deadlines, I'd ask you to remember what they told us last time. Instead, question not just the deadlines and whether or not they're political or economic, question the kind of society you want to see with the state and the government that we have after the next election. Because you remember, they tell us now about how bad and dreadful debt is, and of course debt isn't a good thing, and you have to have healthy public finances, but you have to have a healthy society too. But you know, after the Second World War, when we had record levels of debt and the country was on its knees after the war effort, we managed to build an NHS, build council housing, invest in transport, invest in infrastructure. We invested when times were tough, so that then by the 50s people were saying we've never had it so good. When the economy is fragile and when people are looking for hope, that is precisely the time that you invest in communities and in society. So Plaid Cymru's approach in this election and Plaid Cymru's priority in this election centres around the idea of rebalancing power and wealth throughout the UK. In power, we want to rebalance it away from Westminster and those who have been in power there for so long, of whatever party, back to the communities and to the nations of the United Kingdom. As part of that, we want to see Wales get equality with Scotland. Nothing more, but nothing less, because no one's given me a good reason so far as to why our country should be treated any differently to any other country in the United Kingdom. And we want to balance the economy, rebalance it away from the old financial sectors that have damaged our communities. There could well be a hung parliament in this election. Make sure Wales matters in that hung parliament. Thank you very much.
And next up we have Bob Griffin for the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Yeah. Very well. Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Bob Griffin. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for Merthyr Tydfil and Rhayna. You can tell from my accent I'm not a Valleys boy. I'm from Aberystwyth, where I started my political career as a town councillor and then a county councillor. Well, I've lived in Merthyr for more than 10 years now, and I've been a councillor here in this ward, in Town Ward, until the last council elections. I'd like you to consider voting Liberal Democrat in this election for two reasons. Firstly, about what might happen in Westminster. It looks as though it'll be Ed Miliband or David Cameron who will be the Prime Minister, but it seems very likely that neither will win an outright majority. So the question for voters is, who might form the coalition with either of those two parties. Would it be UKIP? Would it be the SNP? Or would it be the Liberal Democrats? The bookies seem to think it might be us. And we think our record over the last year stands us well in being able to moderate the extremes of the Conservative Party, and we think we will be able to moderate and add brains to the Labour administration and stop the extremes of them, particularly with the economy. The second reason I'd like you to consider voting Liberal Democrat is about here in Merthyr. I think Labour have taken Merthyr for granted for a long time. I think that we've had 15 years of the Welsh Assembly led with a Labour administration where we've had schemes and projects designed to get rid of the deprivation, the high unemployment and the low achievement in Merthyr Tydfil. Very little has changed. We still seem to end up bottom of most of the league tables. I think many of these schemes were window dressing. I don't think these schemes have been designed to be effective or achieve real results. And to some extent I agree with the Conservative candidate about wanting to see a real effective effort to get jobs into Merthyr. Where are the factory units, the small factory units that starter business or expanding businesses could move into and create jobs? Where are the offices that could be rented for new businesses, high-tech, high-knowledge businesses? We don't have them. They're not here. There are entrepreneurs from Merthyr Tydfil. I know my job is dealing with businesses and helping them expand. I meet Merthyr entrepreneurs, but not in Merthyr. They've gone elsewhere and created jobs in different parts of Wales because the resources, the infrastructure is not here. I think Labour have had a long enough chance. I think it's now time for a change to say that this area, this seat, needs real effective action to create the jobs that we need and the incentives for our young people to get on. Today we launched our Welsh Liberal Democrat manifesto. We've got 5 priorities. It starts with prosperity for all. We want to balance the budget in a fair way, not cutting where it doesn't need to be, not cutting for the sake of reducing government expenditure to reduce the taxes for the rich, but to make it fair for everybody and to build a high-skill, low-carbon future for Wales. We want to keep on with our fair taxes, to go on cutting the point at which people have to start paying income tax. We started it with the Conservative coalition. We'd like to go on doing that, and our objective is to get it to £12,500 earnings before you pay any tax by the end of the next Parliament. Our third priority is quality health care for all. We want to increase the resources for our NHS, and we've shown where we can find the money for England and the extra £450 million for Wales that would take to ensure safe staffing levels, by law the right number of nurses on wards, and to give equal priority to mental health. We want to give opportunity for every child. We want to invest in our schools and go on raising the pupil premium, or the pupil deprivation grant that it's called in Wales, that's already helping us here. We've got a lot more in our manifesto, which I hope you'll have a chance to look at later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob, and also Elspeth.
Well, my name is Elspeth Parris. I come from, well, I live in Aberfan, I've done for quite a few years now. And I'm not going to try and tell you the entirety of the 83 pages of the Green Party manifesto in 5 minutes. I'm going to tell you why I decided that here in Merthyr and Rumney, I had to stand for the Green Party. Well, we all know that the Greens are concerned about ecology, And while it isn't my priority, it does matter to me. I don't want fracking, or a very similar process used to get gas out of closed coal mines here in Merthyr. I don't want nuclear waste stored down our old mine shafts either. And both of these are issues that the Coalition has put through Parliament recently, giving national government the right to override local objection. I hope that the Welsh Government will succeed in protecting us on those issues, and will be standing plenty of Green candidates for the Welsh elections next year. I don't want to see more open cast mining in Merthyr either. We've had enough of the dirt and the dust and the noise and the filth of coal mining. Over the past couple of years, I've been working to support people suffering with the bedroom tax. And one of the things that really stunned me was the extent to which people under the bedroom tax were disabled, ill, or vulnerable. I had to learn to work with people who couldn't get to be where I was sitting waiting for them to come and talk to me. I had to work with people who couldn't read and write. People were vulnerable, and they were the ones who were being hit the hardest. Well, we've had a lot of appeals go through the courts. I've supported people individually in those appeals. I've also, of course, stood in protests. We've won some, and we've got some more coming up in court that I'm very hopeful for. This area has some of the highest statistics for health and disability in the country. And it's those people who are suffering not only under the bedroom tax, but under constant assessment and reassessment with the work capability assessment process. People whose condition isn't going to get any better. And for some of them it's going to get worse, and yet they call back year after year, sometimes even after only a few months, to find out if your leg's grown back. It gets a bit tiresome. It's very hard to think about how you're going to actually get on with improving your life. Think about, could you actually do something with your life if you're constantly being threatened with starvation and homelessness. I've heard of people having their benefits stopped because they couldn't get to an assessment, being at the time stuck in a hospital bed with tubes attached in all directions. People forced off sickness benefits because they're supposedly fit for work, while the job centre won't allow them to sign on for job seekers allowance because they're too sick to work and therefore can't comply. And people who do claim job seekers allowance get sanctioned, not because they're cheating the system, but because the system is cheating them. The appointment given to someone who can't read, what he's told verbally is the wrong time, sanctioned. The appointment missed because a sick child has to go to hospital, sanctioned. Or even that they went for a job interview. Surely they're supposed to go for a job interview? Sanctioned. That's not a sanction equivalent to the hour of lost wages I'd have suffered if I'd been late when I used to clock in at Ubers. It's 4 weeks' money or more, as much as 3 years. That's starvation. How can anybody be expected to look for work, to think about how they could improve their employment possibilities when they've got no money for food, telephone calls or bus fares? It has to stop. With so many jobs in Merthyr and Rhayna being on short time or 0 hours, on the minimum wage, all too many people are left to claim benefits from a punitive system, even though they are working. I had to stand for a party which utterly rejects the austerity programme, supported by both the Conservatives and Labour. A party that would commit to raising the minimum wage to the living wage now, not in 5 years' time. To a party that would commit to not only scrapping the bedroom tax, but also to scrapping the work capability assessment, workfare and the sanctions regime. Finally, my personal pledge, not a green policy. I do not approve of us being governed by people on fat salaries who don't understand what it's like for people trying to live on very little here. My personal pledge would be that I would not, if elected, take the whole salary. Half of it would go to local charities in Merthyr and Rhayna. Thank you.
Thank you, Elspeth. And now, David.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Rowlands, and I'm the UK Independence Party candidate for Merthyr and Rhayna. I've been a member of UKIP for 15 years, and prior to that I was a staunch supporter of the Labour Party. But I believe passionately in the sovereignty of the United Kingdom, and I believe passionately in the unity of the United Kingdom. I'm going to talk tonight about something that none of the other parties ever want to talk about, although it's the elephant in the room, and that is immigration. A basic law of economics states that the price of any commodity is determined by supply and demand. The recent fall in the price of fuel at the pumps, the farmers having to sell their milk at a price less than it costs to produce, are prime examples of this principle. The price of labour in the marketplace is governed by exactly the same laws. During its time in office, the Labour Party, the supposed party of the working classes, actively encouraged 3 million plus people to come to this country to seek work. Those people didn't take chief executives' jobs, they didn't take top bankers' jobs or top civil servants' jobs, and for that matter, they didn't take Labour MPs' jobs. They took working class jobs, and where they didn't take those jobs, they forced down the price of labour to where the minimum wage is now the standard wage. This oversupply of cheap labour, mainly semi or unskilled labour, has allowed big business to employ people almost exclusively through agency work. This kind of contract of employment means, of course, that those who work under such contracts do not have the same protection as those employed in the legitimate way. And ladies and gentlemen, it gets worse. We now have 0-hour contracts, that iniquitous form of employment that harks back to the 19th century when dockyard workers turned up to the gates to be chosen or not chosen for a single day's work. The Labour Party, which was initiated to stop the exploitation of the working classes by big business, is the very party which has allowed it to do just that. Uncontrolled, unregulated immigration has had a disastrous effect on the working classes of this country, particularly the lower working classes. Of course, the blame lies not only with the Labour Party, but the Tory party has also allowed this mass immigration to continue unabated. We can, of course, expect that of the Conservatives. They have always been on the side of big business. The Lib Dems and Plaid Cymru wish this unprecedented influx into this country to continue at this unsustainable level. The truth, of course, is that whilst we remain shackled to the European superstate, we can do absolutely nothing to stem this flow. It is the people, and in particular the youth of Merthyr and Rhayna, who are reaping the consequences of immigration on such a scale. Time and time again on my campaign in Merthyr, and I have been campaigning very hard over the last few weeks, I have been told of Polish and Portuguese workers being favoured for jobs over the indigenous youth. Being part of this European superstate not only means that we have the oversupply of labour, it also allows a big business to move their production facilities around Europe at will. Consider the Bosch plant at Miskin, closed with a loss of 900 skilled jobs. Bosch was able to build a brand new plant in Hungary, paid for by British money in the form of regional aid. The Miskin factory workers had the humiliating task of teaching the people to take their jobs. Exactly the same happened with the Rover Car Company when 25,000 jobs were lost because the British government was barred from giving assistance under European rules. Yet at that very same time, British money, again in the form of regional aid, was being used by the German car giant Volkswagen to build a brand new Skoda, now owned by Volkswagen, of course, factory in the Czech Republic. British money used to export British jobs. The European Union has nothing to do with the well-being of the peoples of Europe. It is about two classes of people, big business and the political elite. The political elite, because that is precisely what they are, elite, untouchable and unaccountable. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. And next up is Robert.
Diolch yn fawr Cadeirydd. Hoffwn ni llongyfarch cyngor Undebau Llafur Merthyr Tydfil am drefnu'r cyfarfod heno. My name is Robert Griffiths. I'm the Communist Party candidate in this constituency, and I'd like to join the other candidates in congratulating the Merthyr Tydfil Trade Union Council for organising this debate, but I want to go a little bit further than just some fine words. Unlike most of the candidates on this platform, I can also assure the Trades Council and other trade unionists and working people here that whether elected or not on May the 7th, I will continue not only to be an active trade unionist, but one who stands for the repeal of all of Britain's anti-democratic, anti-trade union laws. I'd be very interested to hear the views of the other candidates on that particular question. We have some of the harshest anti-Labour laws in Europe, and the Labour government did next to nothing about them for 13 years, and the Tories promise another dose of anti-trade union laws in the future, and everything that UKIP, a party bankrolled by big business, has ever said indicates that they don't oppose anti-trade union laws in the slightest. I oppose them, and I'll do that whether or not I'm elected. I'll oppose them as a member of a Unite member of the Cardiff Trade Union Council. And by the way, strong trade unions organised in the workplace is the best way of ensuring that ruthless employers can't use super exploited immigrant labour to undercut pay and conditions. If you want an MP who stands in the tradition, does his best to stand in the tradition of Keir Hardie and S.O. Davis, the two great socialist MPs who've represented this borough, then, in my view, you should seriously consider voting communist on May the 7th. Keir Hardie, who, by the way, was an immigrant from Scotland, and S.O. Davis, who was an immigrant from Abercrombie. The message they preach and the position that has always been adopted by the communists and socialists and trade unionists who make Merthyr Tydfil Trades Council one of the finest, best organised and most active trade union councils in Britain. The message they preach is unity of working people, not a division of working people along national lines or racial lines or whether they're immigrants or not. And clairvoyant, but I think I know what S.O. Davis and Keir Hardie might have said if they were speaking here. They would have pointed out that Britain is the 6th biggest economy in the world. We have the 2nd wealthiest capitalist class in the world, with more financial and economic assets around the globe than any other capitalist class except that of the United States. We are an enormously wealthy economy and country. The problem is, of course, that the vast majority of that wealth is owned and controlled by a tiny minority who stash more than half of it away in 28 British-run tax havens around the world, from the Isle of Man and Jersey to the Bermuda and the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands. I'd like to see one of the other parties have anything to say about that. I'll tell you what the Communist Party says. We should be shutting down all of the tax havens under British jurisdiction around the world. And we should be taxing those phenomenal amounts of wealth. Instead, what have we had? Tax cuts for millionaires, but also tax cuts from Labour, from the Lib Dems, from the Tories, supported by UKIP, tax cuts for the profits of big business, with now one of the lowest rates of corporation tax on big business profits anywhere in the world, lower even than the United States. That's the reality. There's no case at all for austerity. We don't need to be cutting welfare benefits. We don't need to be slashing and privatising public services. There's enough wealth in Britain, if it was properly taxed, to invest in our public services, not have any kind of privatisation. We should be able to invest in the environment, in housing, in public transport. And never mind freezing prices on energy for 6 months or 12 months or whatever it is. Do you think the companies, do you think the big six won't find a way around that? Don't you think they'll be increasing the prices of your household fuel before the freeze comes in and then doubling them afterwards? Of course they will. Why not take gas, electricity and the railways back in public ownership where they belong? After the Second World War on the basis of public ownership and economic planning.
Okay, and finally, apologies, is Eddy.
My name's Eddy. First of all, I'd like to thank the Trades Council as everyone else has done, but mostly I'd like to thank you all for coming out, because I'm sure most of you have better things to do, but you still come out to hear us. When you watch the telly and read the papers, do you sometimes feel we've gone back in time? 100 years ago, people were destitute and relied on soup kitchens to feed them. We still have them in the 21st century. We call them food banks. 100 years ago, men and women gathered on street corners, hoping that a ganger would pick them, maybe they'd get a day pay. Now we sit by the phone waiting on 0-hour contracts. 100 years ago, if you were unable to find jobs and feed your family, you got sent to the workhouse, get a pittance, put food on the table. Now we call it workfare. It's a disgrace. The bedroom tax, hours assessments, benefit sanctions, NHS cuts, open cast minings. Just look around today, the old iron masters would be proud of this town, and that is a disgrace. Merthyr used to be a giant of industry and innovation. Now we top the tables in deprivation and unemployment. Tories blame Labour, Labour blame the Tories, round and round we go, in circles. I feel the time has come for change, and that change should start here. Let's move away from party politics. Let's free ourselves from the blame culture. If you was to choose me to represent you, I will. I'm not a party lackey who has to listen to the party whip. I only have to listen to you. You're the people that I'm supposed to be representing. We live in a wondrous place on the fringes of the national park, a short commute to the capital, surrounded by beauty, well, if you can ignore the open cast. Our road links form a crossroads, north, south, east, west. We should be the jewel in the heads of the valleys. But when you tell people you live in Merthyr, they laugh. They look down their noses at you. You only got to look at the TV programme that was on the other day. You know, that's a disgrace. I want a future where that changes. I want to see pride restored in Merthyr. I want to see jobs, education, investment. I want to feel people envy me for living here, not pity me. All it would take is someone to champion you, someone to make us all heard. I'd like to be that person. I want to tell the government, invest here, invest in us, invest in our children. Some people have said we need an MP who's local, someone who knows what it's like in the real world. Well, I live 2 miles from here, over the valley of Vockery. I've been an electrician all of my life. I've worked hard, I've worked on freezing cold building sites, paying the bills, struggling the same as everybody else has. I've worked on 0-hour contracts for agencies. I've been unemployed, you know, wondering where your next job's coming from. I've lived all the struggles that you have, and I feel I'm ready to represent you. I'm sure you can tell I wasn't born here. I chose to come here. You know, I'll choose to stand and fight here. I moved to Vockery 8 years ago to be my wife and her children. I'm not their biological father, but I am their dad. And anyone can be a father, it takes a real man to be a dad, and it takes a real man to stand up. People tell me an independent's got no power and it's just going to get ignored. They're the same people that told me that when we were fighting Cymru. You know, I was the vice chairman of the United Valleys Action Group. We raised 13,000 objections and we sent Cymru back to America with his tail between his legs. You know, I'll continue to fight to keep our valleys clean, keep our commons clean, away from the dirty industries that want to wreck it. As far as I'm concerned, the time has come to fight for what is right. The time has come to fight for our future. Time has come for Merthyr to rise again. Once again be a town that's envied and respected. And I hope on the 7th of May you'll at least consider me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Eddy. Now, that concludes the first part of the meeting tonight. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes if anybody else has got any questions they want to stick into the ballot box now, or anything that's been raised by some of the speakers now. So if I give it 5 minutes just for you to get them in there, and we'll start again at 10 to 8. Thank you.